Before we ride into this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever met someone who changed the way you understood silence, and not the empty kind, but the kind that holds everything a person is too careful to say out loud? That's what this story is about. If you're new here, welcome to the channel. Hit that subscribe button and ride along with us. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. And if this story reaches something in you, like goes a long way toward keeping these tales alive. Now let's ride. He found her tied to a fence post in the desert heat. What he did next changed both their lives forever. There are moments a man carries for the rest of his life, not because they were grand or violent or loud, but because of what they asked of him in the space of a single breath. For Calder Van, that moment came on an August morning so hot the air itself seemed to flinch. He was at the forge before dawn, the way he always was, hammer rising and falling in the dark, for the sun had the nerve to show itself over the sandstone ridge. The coals breathed orange in the dimness. Sweat had already soaked through his shirt collar. His left hand gripped the tongs with the practiced ease of 10 years of solitary work. And the iron beneath his hammer was beginning to take the shape of a hinge for the east gate he'd been meaning to fix since spring. Red Mesa Draw was quiet at that hour. It was always quiet. That was the arrangement Calder had made with this place. He would work its land, mend its fences, endure its heat, and it would leave him alone. So far, the land had kept its end of the bargain better than most people ever had. He heard the horse first, not the ordinary stamp and shuffle of an animal adjusting its weight in the corral. This was something else, a sound that came from the east beyond the fence line. A high broken cry that cut through the pre-dawn stillness like a blade through dry rope, half alarm, half agony. A horse that had learned fear and was still learning how deep it could go. Calder set his hammer down. He stood still for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to confirm the sound was real, not a trick of wind through the ravine, and then he was moving, pulling on his worn work coat as he crossed the yard, boots, finding the familiar ruts and stones of a path he'd walked 1,000 times in darkness. He followed the sound east, past the water barrel, past the broken wagon wheel he'd been meaning to dismantle, past the place where the mesquite grew low and the ground turned harder and redder toward the ridge. The sky was beginning to lighten at its edges, that particular gray violet that preceded sunrise in the desert. Not a welcoming color, but an honest one, neither warm nor cold. Just the truth of another day arriving, whether you were ready for it or not. He heard her before he saw her. A sound so small it almost wasn't there. The breath of someone rationing air. Someone who had learned to make themselves as little as possible, as quiet as possible, because being noticed had never once brought them anything but harm. The bay mare stood at the far side of the east fence line, trembling from the chest outward, her foreleg wrapped in something, a torn strip of cloth, dark and awkward, not her own doing. She had been tied to the post with a length of rope that had since gone slack enough that she could lower her head, but not enough to move more than a few feet in any direction. Her flank was matted with dried sweat. One eye tracked Calder's approach with the particular exhaustion of a creature that had been afraid for so long it had run out of the energy to bolt. And there, bound to the same post, was a woman. Her wrists were lashed together above her head, the rope knotted twice, not the careless work of a man in a hurry, but the deliberate work of a man who wanted it to hold. She had been there long enough that her head had dropped forward, chin nearly to chest, the black rope of her braid hanging loose and tangled. She faced east. Someone had placed her that way on purpose, facing the direction the sun would rise, ensuring she would bear its full force from the first moment of morning. Her feet were still on the ground. Barely. She was Apache. He could see that in the structure of her face, even half hidden in the quality of her stillness, in the way she wore her endurance like a second skin. She was young, she was in pain, and she was alive by a margin that was getting narrower by the minute. On the ground at her feet, half hidden in the dust, a small square of paper had been folded and tucked between her bound fingers. He didn't touch it yet. Calder pulled his knife and cut the rope in one clean stroke. She collapsed. Not all the way her legs buckled, but some fierce instinct caught her, and she forced herself to one knee, then both hands on the dirt, then her head coming up with the effort of someone lifting a stone twice their weight. When her eyes opened and found him, they were dark and sharp and full of something that was not fear, certainly. It was more like the absence of surprise. Like she had expected this. Like she had decided somewhere in the long, dark hours tied to that post that whatever happened next would be another version of the same thing. He was tall, broad through the shoulders. His face was carved by sun, and hard seasons into something that didn't give much away. Just another stranger. Another danger wearing a different face. Her lips cracked open. Do whatever you want, cowboy. The words came out flat and dry as the dust beneath her palms. Not a surrender exactly, more like someone handing you a weapon they didn't think you'd actually use. Like she had said it before. Like she had learned that saying it first took something away from whoever was going to do it anyway. Calder froze. He stood there with his knife still in his hand and the cut rope hanging from the post, and the morning beginning to press its pale light out across the mesa, and he felt those 5 words hit him. Somewhere he hadn't expected, somewhere behind his sternum, in the place where a man keeps the things he witnessed in his life that he couldn't set right. He put the knife away. He crouched down very slowly until he was below her eye level, until she was looking slightly down at him instead of up. I'm here to help you, he said. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. My name is Calder Van. My homestead is a quarter-mile south. I'm going to lift you now. You can tell me to stop anytime you want, and I'll stop. Still nothing. But the set of her jaw shifted just fractionally, the way a lock shifts when the right key is near, but hasn't yet turned. He lifted her carefully, his hands finding the least painful purchase he could manage, and he was aware the entire time that she was measuring him, every breath, every movement, every choice he made about where to put his hands. She weighed less than she should have. The desert had already been at work on her. The paper fell from her fingers as he lifted her. He caught it. He read the seal in the gray light before he pocketed it. Eli Marsh Trading Company. Copper Bend, New Mexico Territory. He said nothing about it, but his jaw tightened once almost imperceptibly before he turned and carried her toward the homestead. Behind them, the bay mare let out a long, shuddering exhale. Not relief exactly, but the sound of something that had been braced for worse finally being allowed to simply breathe. Red Mesa Draw had not been built for beauty. It had been built for survival. The land stretched in every direction with a particular arrogance of terrain that had existed long before human beings arrived and would continue long after they gave up and left. The mesa walls rose in layers of red and ochre and rust, carved by 100,000 years of wind into shapes that almost looked intentional. Arches, columns, sweeping curves that caught the afternoon light and held it in colors that had no business existing in a desert. The ground between them was hard-packed red clay studded with scrub oak, mesquite, and the occasional defiant cluster of desert wildflowers that had no right being there and bloomed anyway. Van Homestead sat at the base of the southern ridge, sheltered on one side by the stone and exposed on the other 3 to whatever the sky chose to deliver. The cabin was modest, 2 rooms aloft, a covered porch that ran the length of the front, built from a combination of rough-cut timber, hauled from the mountains, and adobe brick Calder had made himself from the mesa clay. It looked like what it was, the work of one man over many years, functional and careful, and carrying no pretense of elegance. Inside, it smelled of wood smoke and iron, and the sage Calder burned each morning to keep the insects down. The light through the single east window was thin and amber at this hour, lying across the narrow bed in soft lines. He laid her there. He'd pulled the extra blanket from the chest at the foot of the bed, a habit from winters when the mesa cold came down hard and fast, and spread it across the straw mattress before setting her on it. She was conscious enough to track his movements, her eyes going methodically around the room, the way someone takes an inventory of exits and threats before allowing themselves to register the rest. She was younger than he'd first thought, mid-20s perhaps. Her features were clean and sharply defined, high cheekbones, a wide forehead, a jaw that even in exhaustion held a certain set to it that suggested she did not bend easily. The rope burns on her wrists were already darkening into something that would need watching. Her riding clothes were good quality once practical, rather than decorative, but torn and dusty from what looked like more than a single night of hardship. She had been beautiful before whoever did this had gotten to her. She was still beautiful in the way that certain things are beautiful after damage, not despite the marks, but partly because of them, because of what they said about the person who had kept going anyway. Calder moved through the cabin with the economy of a man who had spent years alone. He didn't perform care, he simply performed it. Water from the clay pot into a tin cup. A cloth from the stack above the wash basin wrung damp. The small tin of salve he kept on the shelf for Burns sage oil and pine resin, a recipe he'd learned in his Army days from a field medic who'd insisted the frontier remedies beat the Army-issue treatments 9 times out of 10, he set the cup on the edge of the bed within her reach, not in front of her, not in a way that blocked the path to the door. She watched the careful distance he kept. She watched the way he set the cup down like it was something fragile. Like she was something fragile, which she clearly was not, but which he was choosing to treat as such anyway. Her fingers wrapped around the cup. She didn't drink immediately, held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the realness of it. Then she looked at him over the rim. Drink, he said, not a command, more like a reminder that it was permissible. She drank slowly, her eyes not leaving him. When she set the cup down, the small clink of tin against wood was the only sound in the cabin for a long time. You cut the ropes, she said. It wasn't gratitude. It was a question in the shape of a statement. It was someone trying to understand a thing they hadn't encountered before and didn't yet have a category for. No one deserves to be left like that. The words hung in the air, plain and unadorned. Calder had never been a man who dressed his intentions up. He said what he meant because he'd spent enough years watching men say beautiful things while doing ugly ones. Something in her posture shifted. Not much, only enough for a single quiet breath to escape from somewhere deep in her chest, the breath of someone who had been holding on very tightly and had been given for just a moment permission to loosen their grip. She set the cup down. You know the men who did it. It wasn't a question either. I've seen their kind. Silence again. The wind moved outside, pressing against the boards with a dry whisper. Somewhere in the corral, the bay mare shifted her weight. Her gaze moved to his left hand, where it rested on the edge of the workbench, specifically to the inside of his wrist, where the pale scar ran in a thin, curved line, dulled enough to be white rather than pink, the kind of scar that has been part of a person long enough that they've stopped noticing it. He noticed her noticing it. Soldier once, he said, which was true but not the whole truth. Now I fix things. Her eyes lifted to his and stayed there, weighing him, not with suspicion, exactly more with the careful attention of someone who had learned that people revealed themselves in small moments if you watch closely enough. She shifted her weight to test her legs. They trembled, but she pushed herself upright, refusing. He could see her, refusing to show weakness in front of someone she didn't yet trust enough to be weak in front of. Calder reached out instinctively, barely a gesture, a hand offered for steadying. She flinched back. Not violent, not even particularly fast, just precise, the reaction of someone whose body had learned that outstretched hands rarely meant what they looked like they meant. I can stand, she said. He let his hand fall. Didn't say you couldn't, which was what a lesser man might have said. Didn't make it about himself at all. Something moved between them then, not yet trust, not even the beginning of it, but maybe the shape of what trust could look like if given enough time and enough careful behavior. What's your name? He asked. She looked at him for another long moment. Outside, the sun was finally cresting the ridge, pouring its first full light through the east window, laying a bar of gold across the floorboards between them. Nahona, she said. He nodded as though she'd told him something useful rather than something precious. Rest, he said. The salve for your wrists is on the shelf. I'll be outside if you need anything. He was at the door when her voice stopped him, not much louder than before, but with something different in it. Not thanks exactly, something more complicated than thanks. In the dark, she said, when you were coming, I heard your boots before I saw you. He waited. I was deciding, she said, whether to fight or let it happen again. He turned enough to look at her over his shoulder. What did you decide? I hadn't decided yet. A pause. Then you crouched down. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he stepped outside and pulled the door partway closed behind him, leaving it open just enough that the morning air could move through. He stood on the porch for a minute, looking out at the mesa. Then he reached into his coat pocket and took out the small, folded paper he'd found in her fingers. He opened it in the morning light. The Eli Marsh Trading Company seal was clear enough, but it wasn't letterhead or a receipt. It was a note, 3 lines written in a thin, precise hand. Tell the van man to reconsider our arrangement. His land will be worth nothing to him if he cannot work it in peace. This is a courtesy. There will not be another. Calder read it twice. He folded it carefully and put it back in his pocket. He went to check on the mare. The bay mare's name, Calder would learn later, was Sehestano, a word in the Cheyenne trading tongue that Nahona translated days later as something close to the one who does not stop running. She had been given the name as a foal because she had bolted from her first halter 11 times before accepting it, and her dam had watched with the resigned patience of a mother who knows her child's nature is already fixed. That morning, Calder worked on her leg for the better part of an hour. The injury was a rope burn deep enough to be concerning, but not deep enough to be mortal if cleaned properly. The cloth wrapped around it had been Nahona's doing, torn from the hem of her riding shirt, a strip of fabric that had clearly been applied in haste, but with knowledge the pressure correct the placement right. She had tended her horse even while bound. He didn't know how she'd managed it and suspected he never would. He replaced the improvised bandage with clean cloth and a poultice he kept in the barn for exactly this kind of wound, cleaned the mare's leg with water from the half-buried barrel, and spoke to her the whole time in a low, even voice. Not words she would understand, but the tone of them which animals understood just fine. The mare allowed it. She was still trembling, faintly, but she had stopped throwing her head, which he took as progress. When he finished, he sat back on his heels and looked at the animal. She was a good horse, he could see that even in her current state. Deep chest, clean legs, the intelligent eye of an animal that had been well handled and well loved. She had been Nahona's horse for a long time. She had Nahona's habit of watching everything carefully before deciding whether to trust it. He fetched her a bucket of water and a measure of grain from the barn. While she ate, he thought about the note. He had heard of Eli Marsh, of course. Everyone within 50 miles of Copperbend had heard of Eli Marsh. The man ran 3 trading posts, a freight operation, and what people charitably called an import business, which was less charitably a network of quiet arrangements with the kind of people who preferred their dealings unrecorded. He had come to Copperbend 7 years ago with capital no one could account for and had since inserted himself into the town's commerce, the way a nail inserts itself into wood quietly and then immovably. Calder had met him once briefly at the Copperbend General Store. A compact man in his mid-50s, well-dressed for the territory, with a face that gave away exactly as much as he intended it to, and no more, Sir Mayor. He had shaken Calder's hand and said something pleasant about the quality of ironwork he'd seen from Van Homestead's forge, and Calder had nodded and left as soon as he could. That had been 2 years ago. He had not wondered in the time since what Eli Marsh wanted with his land. He was wondering now. The note said our arrangement, which meant Marsh had been building towards something without Calder's knowledge or participation. It was the language of a man who had already decided how a thing was going to go and was offering you the courtesy of learning about it slightly before it happened. The Van Homestead land ran 40 acres along the base of the southern ridge. It had water, a genuine underground spring that fed the half-buried barrel, and the shallow well behind the cabin, which made it the kind of land that was worth twice what it appeared to be in this territory. A man running a freight operation would understand exactly what that meant. A direct route south through the draw with access to water would shave 2 days off the passage to the railhead. Calder had been offered money for the land twice in 4 years. He had declined both times without particular ceremony. The third approach apparently involved tying a woman to his fence post. He folded the note again and put it in the band of his hat. He went inside to check on Nahona. She was asleep. The salve tin had been moved from the shelf to the bedside table. She had used it herself, the lid set carefully aside. Her wrists were dressed more neatly than he could have managed. She lay on her side facing the wall, one hand curled loosely beneath her cheek. He noted that she had positioned herself so that the door was in her peripheral vision even while sleeping. He went back outside and resumed his work. The desert did not ease into evening. It simply stopped being one thing and became another, the yellow light going orange, going red, going violet. In a span of minutes, the temperature dropping fast enough that you had to move or accept the chill. The stars arriving with the abruptness of a door opening on a bright room. Nahona was sitting upright when Calder came inside to start the fire. She had moved to the chair near the window. Not the bed, which he took to mean she preferred not to be caught horizontal if she didn't have to be. She'd braided her hair back, which must have cost her considerable pain given the state of her wrists. She held herself with the careful stillness of someone managing a body that hurt, not disguising the pain, but not offering it to anyone either. He built the fire without speaking, set the coffee pot on the trivet, found the dried beans he'd soaked that morning, and set them to heat with a strip of salt pork and a handful of dried chilies. "You were a soldier," she said. He didn't look up. "A long time ago." "Where?" "Kansas, Missouri, the end of it." He paused. "There were Apache scouts, good men." She was quiet for a moment. My father fought in those years, not with the army. No, no. Another pause. He said the soldiers were mostly afraid. Most of us were. You weren't afraid today. He looked at her then. She was watching him with those careful dark eyes still measuring, but measuring something different now. Not threat and distance, but the thing underneath those, the thing that made a person what they were. I've been afraid plenty, he said, just not of Brock Tally. She absorbed this. You know his name. I know what he is. I've seen him handle horses. A pause. Bueno, I didn't need to see more to know the rest. The beans were beginning to smell right. He moved the pot to a lower heat and found 2 tin plates on the shelf above the stove, set them on the table, found spoons, a routine so embedded in his hands that he could do it without thinking, which left his mind free to think about other things. Where were you going, he asked, before. A long silence. Copper Bend, she said. On business. On business. The words carried something not irony exactly, but an awareness of the gap between the word and the reality. My father's horses were taken, 6 of them, good horses. We tracked them to a ranch outside Copper Bend. A pause. The ranch belongs to a man named Marsh. Calder kept his hands very still. I went to speak with him about the horses. Her voice stayed level, but he could hear what it cost her. He listened. He offered me a price much less than they were worth. I told him they were not for sale, that they had been stolen, that I wanted them returned. She looked at her hands. He was very polite. He thanked me for coming. He called for his men to show me out. Brock Tally. And the others. A beat. They took me to the east ridge of your land. They told me to consider whether I wanted to continue making trouble. Her jaw set. I told them what I thought of that idea, so they tied me to the post. Calder moved the coffee pot off the heat. The bay mare tried to stop them, Nahona continued. She bit one of them. They tied her too. A pause, the kind that carries something so painful it can barely be spoken. They were going to shoot her. I told them. She stopped, looked at the window. I told them to leave her, that she was just an animal reacting to fear, that it wasn't her fault. Another pause. Brock Tally said that was exactly right and that animals shouldn't pay for their owner's stubbornness. She turned back to him. Then they left, and the sun came up. Calder put the beans on the plates, set one in front of her, sat down across the table. How long were you there, he asked. Since before dark. She picked up the spoon, examined it briefly as though confirming it was real, and began to eat. A long night. He ate, she ate. The fire made its small sounds. Outside, the wind had gone quiet the way it sometimes did at this hour. A momentary courtesy from the mesa. A brief pause in the endless conversation between rock and air. Marsh sent me a note, Calder said finally. She looked up. He reached into his coat and put the folded paper on the table between them. Didn't push it toward her, just left it there. She looked at it, looked at him. Then she picked it up and read it, her face still while she did. She set it back down. He wants your land, she said. Apparently. And using me was a message to you. Apparently. She was quiet for a moment. Something moved across her face, not anger, though there was anger in it. Something more complicated. Something that sounded when it came out like, I was not just a means to frighten a woman. I was a message. A letter delivered. She touched the edge of the paper with one finger. I was a letter. Calder looked at her steadily. You were a person who got in his way and a problem he needed handled at the same time. He combined them. A pause. That's how men like Marsh think. She withdrew her hand from the paper. And you, what will you do with this information? Hold on to it, he said. For now. She studied him. Why not go to the sheriff? Keene, he said the name flatly. Keene has been breathing Marsh's air for 3 years. He's not corrupt exactly. He's just tired and afraid of being replaced. He makes certain choices. A pause. He might not make them forever. You trust him to change. I trust that men who know they're doing wrong carry it somewhere. Sooner or later, it gets heavy. Nahona looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at her plate and ate another spoonful of beans. My father, she said quietly, he says something similar, that men who carry shame eventually set it down. The question is whether they set it down somewhere useful. A pause. His name is Dawa. He is an elder of our community. He knows this territory better than the land knows itself. Something in the way she said it, the particular combination of pride and precision, made Calder pay attention in a way he hadn't quite expected. He sent you here, Calder said. It wasn't accusatory, just a reading of what she'd said. She didn't answer immediately. He told me, she said carefully, that if I came to this valley, I would find someone who understood what it meant to be on the wrong side of a rope. She looked at his wrist. I thought he meant that metaphorically. Calder said nothing. Did he know you, Ba? She asked. A long silence, long enough that the fire shifted and the coffee made a small sound in his pot. I don't know, Calder said, which was the truth, though not all of it. The meal ended. He cleared the plates. She moved back to the chair by the window. He built the fire up and went to check on the mare one last time. When he came back inside, she was asleep in the chair. Not meaning to be, clearly her head tilted back at an angle that would hurt her neck in the morning. The firelight moved across her face in soft patterns. He took the extra blanket from the chest and draped it over her, careful not to brush her wrists, careful not to touch her at all unless he had to. She stirred slightly. You don't have to look after me, she murmured, half asleep. I know, he said. He sat in the other chair by the fire, and after a time, in the company of another person's breathing, he found that the night felt slightly less empty than usual. Morning arrived with gold light crawling across the ridge. Nahona was already awake when Calder came inside from his pre-dawn work, sitting at the table with her hands wrapped around a cup of water, watching the light change in the east window with the expression of someone who had not always been certain they would see another morning. He made coffee. She watched him make it. Less water than you think, she said. More bitter than that. He looked at her. The coffee. A slight pause that might have been the beginning of a smile. I can see you thinking about the amount. He adjusted the measure, made coffee the way she'd described, poured 2 cups, slid one across the table. She tasted it. Something in her shoulders settled. Good, she said. This was how they began to learn each other, in these small calibrations, these minor discoveries about how the other person moved through a day. Not grand conversations, not declarations. The specific weight of a tin cup. The way she approached the injured mare in the morning, solely from the side, announcing herself with a murmur before touching the animal. The way he left her space at the workbench without being asked. The way she began, after 3 days, to leave small offerings, a clay bowl of crushed herbs on the corner of his forge each morning, something for the ache in his wrist that he had never mentioned. He found these without comment and used them without ceremony, which was, he suspected, exactly what she needed him to do. The rhythm between them was not easy, but it was real. She worked when she could stand slowly at first, then with increasing steadiness as her wrists healed and the desert heat receded slightly in the evenings. She gathered water, sorted dried herbs from her saddlebag with the methodical attention of someone whose knowledge of plants was not hobby knowledge, but survival knowledge. She repaired the torn stitching on his worn saddlebag, working in the afternoon light with a needle she'd found in the small kit she carried and thread from a spool he kept for mending gear. Her stitches were smaller than his would have been, more precise. He cooked when she needed to rest. His cooking was not ambitious, beans, dried meat, the occasional flat bread he'd learned from a Pueblo woman in his army days, who had taken pity on the soldiers' terrible rations. But he did it without complaint and tasted everything before serving it, which was, he'd learned, the most honest kind of cooking. One afternoon, a storm gathered on the horizon, building across the northern mesa in those specific dark towers that meant real rain. Not the dry lightning shows the desert occasionally staged for entertainment. They were both in the yard, Calder working on a fence post, Nahona sorting bundles of dried sage into the covered section of the porch. The wind picked up, carrying the particular smell of approaching rain dust turning to wet earth. Something ancient and slightly mineral, the smell of a landscape that was accustomed to thirst receiving the promise of its end. Wind caught her braid and whipped it across her cheek. Calder was watching her, he realized, not meaning to, but unable not to. The way she moved had become familiar to him in a way that was new. The way something becomes familiar, not through repetition, but through attention. The particular economy of her gestures. The way she looked at the horizon before beginning any outdoor task, not fearfully, but with the assessment of someone who respected what weather could do. "You don't have to work," he said. She didn't look up. "I don't know how to sit still." He considered this. "Me neither." She glanced at him, then the briefest flicker of something crossing her face there and gone. Not quite a smile. Something more careful than a smile, but made of the same material. They kept working. That evening, the first drops fell, scattered exploratory the way rain in the desert begins, as if surprised at itself. Nahona stepped off the porch and walked into the yard, tilting her face upward. Calder stood in the doorway watching her. She turned her face to the rain with her eyes closed, and for a moment he could see her very clearly. Not what she had been through, but who she was underneath it. The person the desert and the rope burns and the long terrible night had not managed to reach. She was still in there. She was meeting the rain. "You said you fixed things," she said, not turning. "I try my—" A long quiet, raindrops on the dry ground, the sound of the land accepting something it needed. "Some things break," she said, "and stay broken." He stepped off the porch. The rain touched his shoulders, his face. He walked toward her until he was a few feet away, not close, but close enough that she would have heard the rain on him too. "Some things," he said, "find their way back." She exhaled, her eyes opened. The rain was already slowing. The desert rarely committed, and in the last of it, the strange brief silver of it, she looked at him. She didn't say anything, but she didn't look away either. The note from Marsh stayed in the band of Calder's hat. He thought about it in the early mornings at the forge when the hammer work was automatic enough to leave his mind free. He thought about it while checking the south fence line on the evenings when the light was low and the hawks were working the thermals above the ridge. He had not told Nahona he still had it, not because he was hiding it exactly, but because the time had not been right, and because he was still deciding what to do about the information it represented. This was a mistake. He would understand that later. At the time, it felt like protection. It was the habit of a man who had spent his life solving problems alone, keeping the pieces of a puzzle to himself while he worked out the shape. On the sixth morning of her staying, though, neither of them had used a word like staying. Both carefully avoiding any language that implied permanence or plan, Calder rose early and went to the forge while Nahona slept. He was working on a latch mechanism for the barn door when he heard her moving inside the cabin, then the scrape of the workbench drawer. He knew which drawer before she opened it. He had put the note there 3 days ago when it had fallen from his hat during a windstorm, and he'd not yet found a better place for it. The silence from inside the cabin changed quality. He set his hammer down. When he came through the door, she was standing at the workbench, the note in her hands, reading it in the morning light. She read it once, read it again. Then she folded it precisely along its original creases and placed it back on the workbench and turned to face him. Her expression was very still. "You've had this since the beginning," she said. "Yes." "From my fingers, when you carried me." "Yes." She looked at the note, then at him. "You knew what it meant. Who sent it? Why?" "Yeah, yes." A long silence. Outside, the morning was brightening fast. No clouds today, just the mesa turning from gray to gold to the particular hard white of a clear desert morning. "I thought," she said carefully, "that you were different." The words hit him the way she had intended them to, not as an accusation, but as a grief. The grief of someone who had extended a fraction of trust and been given a reason to regret it. "I wasn't hiding it to deceive you," he said. "Then why?" "Because I needed to understand what it meant before I knew what to do with it." He paused. "And because I didn't want to frighten you before you had healed enough to— I am not a child." Her voice was quiet, but it cut. "I do not need to be managed." He took that, didn't argue it, because she was right. "No," he said, "you're not. And I should have shown it to you the first night." The silence stretched. She moved to the chair by the window and sat in it, looking at the mesa. The morning light was doing what it did at this hour, rendering everything in that honest way that left no soft edges, no flattering distance. "Tell me," she said, "what you understand it to mean." He told her. All of it, what he knew about Marsh, the trading operation, the water rights, the freight route. The way the note had been placed in her hands, not left at the post, which meant Tally had been told to make sure Calder found it when he found her. The way the whole event had been choreographed, her presence a demonstration of Marsh's reach, her suffering a language spoken for Calder's benefit. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. They used me as a letter, she said. She had said this before the night he'd shown her the note at dinner. But she said it differently now, with a fuller understanding of what it meant, a harder knowing. Yes, he said. And you? I knew, he said, and I kept it from you. That was wrong. I'm telling you now. She looked at him. Then she looked away. My people's horses, she said. They are still on Marsh's land. Yes. And now he wants yours. Yes. She folded her hands in her lap, careful of her wrists. Then we have a shared problem. Calder looked at her. The word we sat in the air between them the first time either of them had used it. Small word. Heavy. Apparently, he said, she met his eyes. And whatever had cracked between them in the discovery of the note, he could feel it beginning tentatively to mend. Not from his words, but from the fact that he had given her the full picture without softening it, had trusted her with the hard version of the truth. I should tell you something else, she said. He waited. Dawa. She looked at her hands. My father. He sent me this way deliberately. He said I would find someone who would not harm me, that I should trust them. She paused. I thought it was an elder's wishful thinking, or that he meant I would find a safe route through your territory. Another pause. But the way he said it, he said this person, specific. He knew of you somehow. She looked up. I don't know how. He doesn't explain himself easily, but I think, what do you think? She held his gaze. I think there is more to this situation than I understand yet. And I think you may not understand all of it either. Calder said nothing, but he thought of the Apache scouts he had known in Kansas, of a specific winter night on the Missouri border pinned down in a ravine, a patrol of soldiers surrounded by men who should have finished them and didn't because of one Apache man who had stepped between the soldiers and what was coming, who had said something in a language Calder didn't speak, who had then disappeared into the darkness before Calder could ask his name. He had thought about that man many times in the years since. He looked at Nahona. One day at a time, he said. That's how I know how to do things. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once, a small, decisive motion that meant she had taken in what he'd said and was choosing for now to accept it. Good, she said. Then today I would like to see the mayor, and tomorrow we can decide the rest. She stood and her movements were steadier than they'd been the day before and the day before that. Outside, the bay mare was already waiting at the corral fence, watching the cabin door, patient, in particular, the way animals are patient when they love someone enough to wait. The second week settled over Van Homestead with a kind of provisional peace, the kind that knew it was provisional and conducted itself accordingly, enjoying what it had without pretending it was permanent. Nahona's wrists healed. Not all at once, the rope burns went through their stages angry red, giving way to the dusky purple of deep tissue, then the first tentative signs of new skin at the edges. She treated them herself each morning with a paste she made from ingredients she'd brought in her saddlebag, a root she called tsetse dried and ground to powder, mixed with a small measure of tallow. The result smelled faintly of pine and something else, something that didn't have a name in any language Calder knew, but that he had begun in the mornings when she was working at the small table by the window, to simply call the smell of her being there. He had not named this to himself until he was already used to it. That was how it seemed to work between them, the increments of familiarity so gradual that he only became aware of them in retrospect, looking back from a new point and seeing how far he'd traveled without noticing the journey. She had begun to hum while she worked, not often and not for an audience. It happened in the afternoon when she was seated on the porch, sorting herbs or mending something, and the particular slant of light and quality of the wind conspired to produce a moment in which she forgot to be careful. A low sound, melodic and unhurried, following no pattern he could identify, but with a logic internal to itself. Apache music, or whatever was left of it when stripped of ceremony, just the residue, the part a person carries so deeply inside themselves, it comes out without permission. He heard it from the forge. He didn't comment on it. He simply let it exist. One afternoon, he was driving fence posts along the north boundary while she worked near the porch, and he heard the humming drift across the yard toward him on the hot, still air. He held a post steady with one hand and lifted the mallet with the other, and the rhythm of his blows fell without him planning it into the rhythm of what she was humming. 4 beats a pause. 4 beats a pause. He didn't know how long they kept that accidental time together. Long enough that when she stopped, the silence felt like a thing removed rather than just the absence of something. She had noticed too. He knew that from the way she glanced at him over her shoulder. But she said nothing about it. Some things he was learning were communicated precisely by the decision not to speak them. 3 nights after the confrontation over the note, a proper storm came through, the real kind, not the brief shower that had passed on her second day. This one arrived with intention, building from the northwest through the afternoon until the sky turned the particular green-gray that meant hours of rain and the kind of lightning that walked across the mesa in visible strides. Calder pulled the mare into the small barn. Nahona helped him secure the loose items in the yard, the feed bags, the tools, the lengths of wire that could become dangerous in strong wind. They worked in coordinated silence, each of them reading the other's intentions and adjusting without having to ask. He was closing the barn door when the first real rain hit. Not drops, but a sheet, the kind that arrives all at once. They ran for the porch. She made it first. He was a few steps behind. When he arrived, shaking water from his hat brim, she was standing at the porch railing, watching the rain fall across the yard, the way it turned the red dust to dark and then to mud, the way it made the sage release its smell in one concentrated burst. The lantern inside threw warm light through the window behind them, and the storm made the world beyond the porch edge into a moving curtain. "It's different here," she said. "The rain." He hung his hat on the nail by the door and leaned against the post. "Different how?" "At home," she paused. "Where I was before the rain comes in patterns. The same way each season. You know it by the smell 3 days before." She watched the mesa disappear behind the water. "Here it comes like a stranger, without manners." "I've always liked that about it," he said. She glanced at him. "You like things without manners." "I like things that are honest about what they are." A long quiet. Thunder rolled somewhere to the north, a slow unpacking of sound across the ridge. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. She kept her eyes on the rain. "When I was tied to that post, when I had been there all night, I spent a long time deciding what I believed about people." She paused. "Not what I knew, what I believed. There is a difference, well." "Yes," he said. "I decided," she said carefully, "that I had been wrong before. To believe in people's decency without proof. That it was a kind of carelessness to extend trust before it was earned. That the only honest position was to assume the worst until shown otherwise." Another pause. "When I heard your boots on the ground coming toward me, I had made that decision. I was ready to live in it." The rain was loud on the porch roof. He didn't speak. "Then you crouched down," she said, "so I could look down at you instead of up." She turned toward him, slightly, not fully. "No one had ever done that before. Not like that. Not as though my being comfortable mattered more than their appearing strong." He looked at his hands. "I still wasn't sure," she said. "After you brought me inside, after the water, after the salve." She touched her wrist lightly, feeling the new skin. "I kept waiting for the moment when you would show me what it was really about, what you were really after. And, and it didn't come." She finally looked at him fully. "That confused me almost as much as the crouching down." He met her eyes. "I'm not very complicated," he said. "No," she agreed, "but you are very rare." The lightning walked across the mesa. He could see it through the rain, 3 distinct strikes in rapid succession, lighting the red stone in brief, terrible white. Then the thunder following behind at a respectful distance, the sound of something large taking its time. "The night you found the note," he said. "Yes. I should have shown it to you immediately, not because I was hiding anything, but because it was yours to know. You were part of it. You were the most part of it." He looked at the rain. "I have a habit of working things out alone before bringing other people in. It served me well when I was alone. It doesn't serve me as well now." She was quiet for a moment. "Now," she said carefully. "Now," he confirmed. Another silence. Comfortable in the way that silence becomes comfortable between people who have established that it doesn't need to be filled. "Dawa," she said eventually. "My father. He told me something before I left." She paused, considering how much to say. "He said, go to the draw, find the man with the scar on his wrist. He will not harm you. Stay until you understand why." Calder looked at her. "I was annoyed," she said. "He is often cryptic. I thought he meant stay until the horses were recovered, or until the situation with Marsh was resolved. She paused. I'm beginning to think he meant something else, Bimbert. What do you think he meant? She looked at him for a long moment. The rain had softened to something quieter, more persistent, the kind that meant to stay a while. I think, she said, that Dawa knows something about you that I don't know yet, and I think he knew that whatever it was, it would matter. Calder said nothing, but inside the thought he had been carrying since that first night, since she had said he said I would find someone who understood what it meant to be on the wrong side of a rope shifted, took on new weight. An elder who had sent his daughter to a specific man at a specific place, a scar on Calder's wrist from a military punishment, an Apache man who had once stood between a pin-bond-down patrol and its fate on a Missouri winter night. He had never known the name of that man, but he had never stopped being grateful. He said, when this is over, when we know what we need to know, I'd like to meet him. Nahona looked at him. Something in her face shifted, not warmth exactly, but the opening of a door that had been closed for a long time. He would like that too, she said. I think. The rain fell softly. The lantern burned behind them and the window steady and unafraid of the dark. They came on a Tuesday morning, which was the kind of detail that afterwards seemed wrong. Violence should come on dramatic days, storm days, days that announced themselves as significant. Instead, Brock Tally arrived in bright, flat sunshine, with a sky so clean and blue it looked freshly made, and the sound of the horses was just sound until it wasn't. Nahona heard them first. She was in the corral with the mare working on the healing leg with a fresh application of poultice when her hand stilled and her head came up. Not dramatically, just the particular alert stillness of someone whose nervous system had learned to read distance and approach before her conscious mind caught up. Calder was at the barn. He came out at her stillness and looked at the ridge road. 6 horses, not 3. Brock Tally at the front, red-faced, riding with the particular looseness of a man who has had enough to drink to feel comfortable, but not enough to impair his judgment, which was the most dangerous state for someone like Brock. Behind him, Vern Mathers, his expression carrying that twist of mean pleasure that Calder had come to recognize. Cole Darren in the rear as before, but this time his jaw was set in a way that was different from the last time, tighter, more reluctant. And behind Cole, 3 men Calder didn't know by name, but recognized by type hired men, the kind whose employment history was the kind not discussed. Marsh's men. Calder's jaw tightened once. He moved to the gate. Nahona, he said without turning. Go inside. No, she said immediately. He turned. She was standing at the corral fence, her hand on the mare's neck, and her expression was a careful composition of everything she felt to fear. Yes, you would have to be senseless not to feel it, but also something harder, something that had been sitting in her since the night at the post, a refusal to be removed from her own story one more time. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once and turned back to the gate. They drew up outside in a storm of dust. Brock dismounted with the exaggerated care of a man establishing himself. He looked at Calder, then past him at Nahona, and he smiled the particular smile of a man who has power and enjoys displaying it. Well now, he said, looks like our situation hasn't been resolved. There's no situation, Calder said. Get off my land. Vern spat. We're here representing a business interest. Mr. Marsh would like to discuss his offer regarding this property. Mr. Marsh can write a letter. Brock's smile didn't change. He did near enough. Seems you didn't take it seriously. His eyes moved to Nahona again. We thought a second reminder might help. Calder felt the cold settle into him, the specific cold he'd learned in the army, the stillness that came when things became very simple, because the choices had reduced themselves to almost nothing. He stood at the gate and he did not move, and his voice was the voice of a man who has already seen the end of the situation and is simply waiting for the other parties to catch up. Those 3 men behind Cole, he said, Marsh's, not Copper Ben's. Brock blinked, surprised that Calder had named it so directly. You're going to tell Marsh, Calder continued, that this property isn't for sale. You're going to tell him the same thing you should have told him before you rode out here the first time, and you're going to leave. Or, Brock said, or I'm going to stand here, Calder said, and I'm going to keep standing here, and you're going to have to decide what that means to you. Brock looked at Vern. Vern's hand moved toward his holster. Cole Darren in the rear didn't move toward his. He was looking at the ground beside his horse's feet. You can't stop 6 men, Brock said. I'm not trying to stop 6 men, Calder replied. I'm trying to stop you from making a decision you can't undo. Big words for one man. I've had practice. Brock's smile had gone. What was underneath it was uglier, not rage exactly, but the bruised pride of a man who had expected this to be simple and found it wasn't. He looked past Calder at Nahona again. The Apache girl, he said. She's still on your land. Town has questions about that. The town can bring its questions to me in person, Calder said, in daylight, without hired hands. A beat. Mr. Marsh, Brock said, has had enough patience with this situation. He wanted me to tell you that clearly. Tell him I heard you, Calder said. Another beat, longer this time. The sun was full on the yard, and the heat pressed down on everything, and Calder stood in the middle of it without moving, while Brock Talley stood just outside the gate with 6 men behind him and tried to find the thing that would make this go the way he'd planned it. He didn't find it. Cole, he said suddenly, get the rope. Cole's head came up. He looked at Brock. Then he looked at Nahona, not with Brock's cruelty, but with something else. Something uncomfortable, something a man wears when he is about to do something he knows is wrong and hasn't yet decided whether he will. Cole, Brock said again, harder. Cole reached for the rope on his saddle. His hand stopped. He didn't reach further. He just stopped. Held it with his fingers, barely touching the coil, not taking it, not dropping it, just not moving. Brock turned to look at him, and in that moment of Brock's distraction, one of the 3 hired men in the rear reached into his saddlebag. What came out was not a weapon, it was a bottle of coal oil. Calder understood immediately. Nahona, he said, and his voice was different now. Not the measured tone of before, but urgency made brief. The house. Get inside the house. She didn't argue. She was already moving, not running, but moving with the controlled speed of someone who had heard the difference in his voice and made the translation. Brock saw her going and grinned. Smart girl. The hired man with the coal oil moved toward the barn. The barn went fast. Not the whole barn, Calder had it half doused with water from the barrel, within the first minutes dragging a soaked feed sack across the burning section of the wall, while smoke stung his eyes and the mare screamed from inside. He got the mare out. He got the tools out. The grain bins he could not reach in time, half of them caught, and took the north section of the roof with them before he got enough water to slow it. Brock and his men watched from outside the gate. They didn't come onto the property. They just watched, and Brock said something to Vern that made Vern laugh, and then they turned their horses and rode back toward Copper Bend with the smoke from Van Homestead rising behind them in the clean blue sky. Cole Darren was the last to go. He sat his horse at the gate for an extra moment, looking at the burning barn, at Calder working against it at the smoke. His face was the face of a man who had just watched himself do something in his stillness that was not quite as bad as what the others had done, but not far enough from it to matter. Then he rode. Calder fought the fire for 2 hours. Nahona came out of the cabin when the men had gone and worked beside him without being asked, carrying water, pulling the feed sacks, keeping the wet cloth over her face against the smoke. She didn't ask if he needed help. She simply found the next thing that needed doing and did it. By mid-afternoon, the fire was out. The north wall of the barn was gone. The roof over that section was gone. The grain bins were lost. The tools and the mare in the south section of the structure were intact. They stood in the yard looking at it. Smoke still rose in thin threads. The smell of burned wood and scorched grain hung over everything. The mare stood at the corral fence with her head low, watching them both. I'm sorry, Nahona said. It's not your doing. They used me to send you a message. Now they're using me again. My presence here gave them reason. They didn't need a reason, Calder said. They had one before you arrived. He looked at the burned section of wall. This is about the land. You are, he paused, choosing the word carefully. The part they thought would be easier to threaten, because they're wrong about what matters to me. She looked at him. What matters to you? He met her eyes. Doing the right thing tends to complicate a man's life, he said. I've never found a way to make it simple, but I can't stop doing it. A pause. You matter, he said, simple and unadorned the way he said everything. This land matters. Those are not separate things. She held his gaze for a long moment. Come inside, she said. You're bleeding. He looked at his arm. He'd caught a burning board edge without noticing. The skin along his forearm was opened in a shallow line. He hadn't felt it. She cleaned it at the table, her hands steady, her movements economical. The cabin smelled of smoke from their clothes. Outside, the last light was going from orange to dark. He watched her work. In the army, he said. There was a night Missouri winter time when we were pinned down. A patrol of 12 men, ravine on 3 sides, hostile movement on the ridge. We should not have survived it. She looked up from his arm. A man came out of the dark, he said. Apache. He walked between us and what was on the ridge, and he spoke. I don't know what he said. Whatever it was, the men on the ridge pulled back. He paused. He was gone before we could ask his name. I've thought about him since. Many times. Nahona was very still. Dawa, she said softly. It wasn't a question. I don't know, Calder said. I've never been able to find out. She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked back at his arm, finished her work, set aside the cloth. He has a scar, she said quietly, on his right hand, 3 fingers. From a knife, he said. He never told me when. Calder was quiet. He sent me to you, she said. Not as a coincidence, not as a test. She looked up. He has been watching over something, some debt or gift or promise for a long time, and he finally sent the payment. He sent you, Calder said. He sent me to a safe place, she corrected, very carefully. That is different. But the difference between those two things was smaller than she made it sound, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so out loud. The fire had burned away the clean distance between them. The smoke and the water and the urgency of the afternoon had stripped the last careful margins from how they moved together, how they occupied the same space. She sat across from him at the table, and he was aware with an acuity he hadn't felt in years of how close they were, of the quality of the silence between them, of how differently he breathed at this distance than he did when he was on the other side of the cabin. You fix things, she said. The phrase had become a kind of conversation between them. She returned to it at different angles, different moments, as if she were examining a stone she had picked up and kept finding new facets. I try, he said, as he always said. The barn, she said. You'll rebuild it. Yes. And what Marsh has done, you'll find a way to, yes. She looked at him. How do you know? How are you certain? He thought about it. I'm not certain, he said, Moon. Certainty is for people who don't have to do the work. I'm just, he paused, stubborn about not quitting. Something crossed her face, quick, almost hidden, but he saw it. Something between recognition and relief, the face of a person who has found an echo of themselves in someone unexpected. My father says something like that, she said. He says the river doesn't know where it is going. It just goes. Smart man, Calder said. Insufferably so, she replied. And for the first time, the very first time, she smiled at him with the full weight of it, not the brief, cautious flicker he had seen before, but something that reached her eyes and stayed there. Outside, the smoke from the ruined barn wall had thinned to almost nothing. The stars were coming out over Red Mesa Draw, indifferent and brilliant, the same stars that had been there for all of it. Amos Keene wrote in the following morning, not at dawn, which would have felt urgent, and not at noon, which would have felt deliberate. Mid-morning, the uncomfortable hour that suggested a man who had lost sleep over his decision and finally risen and gotten dressed and done the thing he'd been putting off. He arrived alone. Calder was on the porch with coffee when he heard the horse. He watched Keene ride in, dismount at the gate with the particular stiffness of a man whose body was registering what his conscience already knew. The sheriff tied his horse carefully, walked to the gate, looked at the burned section of barn wall without comment. Keene, Calder said. Van. The sheriff removed his hat, held it at his side, looked at the barn. I heard there was some trouble. You heard correctly. Keene's jaw worked. Brock Talley filed a report this morning. Says there was a confrontation. Says you drew on them. I didn't draw on anyone. I know that. Keene said it quickly, too quickly, for a man who didn't know it. I know that, Van. He paused. Marsh came to see me last night. After. He looked at his hat. He was very calm. He's always calm. That's the worst part about him. He's always calm. Calder waited. He told me to come out here this morning and make an official inquiry into the fire. Said it appeared to be the result of an altercation caused by the woman on your property. Said the town council would support a formal request to remove her. And Keene looked up. And I'm telling you what he said, not that I'm doing it. A long silence. There's a difference, Keen said as if Nahona had been listening through the door and he wanted her to hear it too, between doing what you're told and doing what you're able to live with. He paused. I've been on the wrong side of that line for a while, I know it. I expect you know it too. Yes, Calder said. I can arrest Marsh, Keen said. Not without evidence. Not with the men he has on his side at the council. He controls enough votes to have me removed if he wanted to, and I think he's getting close to wanting to. He stopped. But I can refuse to harass women and damage property owners on his behalf. I can do that much. That's something, Calder said. It's not enough, Keen said. I know that too. He put his hat back on with the tired precision of a man who had been wearing the same hat through too many compromises. He looked at Calder steadily. If you had evidence, he said carefully, of what he's been doing, the horses, the land arrangements, the men he sent out to do his dirty work, if you had something on paper, something with his seal on it. He stopped. Let that sit for a moment. A man in my position would be interested in seeing something like that. Calder held his gaze. Then he reached into his coat and produced the folded note. He held it for a moment. Then he handed it to Keen. Keen read it again. His face did several things in sequence. This is his seal, he said. Yes. And this note, it was on her. When you found her. Yes. Keen folded the note. He held it for a moment, weighing it, then handed it back. That's a piece, he said. Not enough alone, but a piece. He looked toward the cabin where Nahona had appeared in the doorway watching. He tipped his hat to her in awkward, genuine gesture. Ma'am. She looked at him steadily, did not return the greeting, but she did not look away either. Cole Darren, Calder said. He was here yesterday. He's not Brock Talley. He knows what Marsh has been doing. Keen nodded slowly. I know Cole. He's young. He's afraid. A pause. Fear tends to shake loose eventually. Seems like, Calder said. Keen turned his horse. At the gate he paused. I'll say I conducted an inquiry, he said. I'll say the fire appears to have been accidental. That'll buy you some time. He looked back at Calder. Not a lot of time, but some. He rode back toward Copper Bend, and this time the dust rising behind him felt different, less like a retreating threat and more like a man leaving at his own pace with a different weight on him than he'd arrived with. That evening was quiet. The quiet after violence always is not peaceful exactly, but exhausted into something that resembled peace. The fire damage to the barn was easier to look at in the evening light than in the full harsh afternoon. The burned sections softened by shadow into something that looked more like absence than destruction. They sat at the table with the lamp between them. She had made something from the last of the dried corn and the herbs she kept in her bag, a thick, slightly sweet mush that tasted of things he couldn't identify, but that was undeniably food made by someone who understood how to feed people with very little. They ate without speaking for a while. When we resolve this, she said eventually, I will need to return the horses to my people. Yes. And after that, she paused, looked at her plate. I don't know what after that looks like. I haven't thought past the horses. No. Have you, she asked, thought past it? He looked at her, a little. She looked back, waited. This land, he said carefully, is big enough for two kinds of work, the barge and something else. A pause, a person who knows horses the way you do, who knows the land's medicine, there's work in that. This territory is full of people who need both. She was very still. I'm not saying, he started. I know what you're saying, she said, and what you're not saying. He met her eyes. What am I not saying? She looked at him for a long moment. The lamp made her face all warmth and shadow and honesty. That you don't want me to leave, she said simply. He held her gaze. That's right. She looked at the table, looked back at him. Something moved through her face, not the quick concealed things he had grown accustomed to reading, but something slower and more deliberate, a choice being made in full view rather than hidden. She put her hand on the table between them. Not toward him, just there. Open. He reached across and placed his hand over hers, very gently, not claiming, just covering. Her hand was warm and steady under his. I don't know what this is, she said quietly. I don't have the right language for it. Neither do I, he said. I know that I am not afraid of you, she said. I know that your presence makes this place feel, she searched for the word, survivable. That's a start, he said. It is, she agreed. Outside, the night had fully arrived, and Red Mesa Draw was doing what it did, holding the dark so completely that the stars above it seemed almost loud with light. The fire in the hearth made its small sounds. The mare secured in the undamaged half of the barn was quiet. Two hands on a scarred wooden table. Not a declaration, not a promise, but the shape of something that could become both given enough time and enough careful days. Dawa arrived 4 days after the fire. He came in the early morning the way Calder had before the sun was properly up, when the mesa wore its brief hour of cool gray before the heat reasserted itself. Calder heard the horses, two of them measured and unhurried, and stepped onto the porch to find four riders approaching from the eastern trail. Not Brock Talley's swagger, not Marsh's hired men. Something else entirely, a different kind of authority, quieter and older, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. Nahona was beside him before he had registered her movement. She had been at the window. She always knew when something was approaching before it announced itself. She stepped out onto the porch and stood very still for a moment, looking at the riders, and then something in her every careful, collected thing she'd been carrying for 2 weeks broke open in a way he'd never seen before. Not loudly, just completely. She stepped off the porch and walked across the yard, and her walk became something faster, and by the time the lead rider had dismounted, she was at the gate, and the old man who came through it caught her the way a person catches something they have been waiting a long time to hold. He was not what Calder had expected, though he couldn't have said what he'd expected. Dawa was perhaps 65, perhaps older. It was the kind of age that had stopped accumulating in the conventional way and had become instead a quality the way certain rock faces become a quality. He was not a large man, but he carried himself with the compact authority of someone who had spent decades being listened to and had never confused that with importance. His face was lined deeply, his hair silver and white, worn loose to his shoulders. His right hand, Calder noticed immediately, bore 3 parallel scars across the fingers. Old, completely healed, long-standing. He held Nahona for a long moment, said something to her in their language quiet, and she answered, and whatever passed between them was not for Calder to hear, and he did not try. When she stepped back, Dawa looked at Calder. The look was not the assessment of a stranger. It was the recognition, slow, careful, honest, of a man who is seeing someone he has thought about for a long time finally standing in front of him. Calder met it without flinching. Dawa walked to him. He stopped a few feet away and looked at Calder's face with a thoroughness that was not rude but was not gentle either. Just complete. The way a man looks when he wants to understand something rather than merely observe it. Then he looked at Calder's left wrist, at the pale scar. "I have seen that before," he said. His English was careful, precise, the English of someone who had learned it with intention rather than necessity. "I imagine you have," Calder said. "You were young, thinner." A pause. "Frightened." "I was all of those things." Dawa nodded slowly. "You did not run." "No." "The others wanted to. 3 of them." He paused. "You held them still." Calder said nothing. His jaw was tight, but not with anger. "I did not know your name," Dawa said. "I knew only what I saw. A young soldier who chose in a moment when no one would have blamed him for a different choice to hold his ground." Another pause. "I have thought about him many times. Whether he survived the war, what he became." "Now you know," Calder said. "Now I know," Dawa agreed. Silence. "You sent her to me," Calder said. "I sent her to a safe place," Dawa said. "The same words she used and you heard, and I am told you understood the difference." Calder looked at Nahona. She was watching them both with the expression of someone witnessing a conversation she had suspected would happen, but had not been able to prepare for. "Marsh wanted this land," Calder said. "She was in the middle of that before she arrived." "I know what Marsh is," Dawa said. "I also knew you were what you are. I made a calculation." He paused. "I am told I was not wrong. The barn burned. The barn can be rebuilt." Dawa looked at it, the damaged wall, the missing roof section. Then he looked at his 3 companions who had dismounted and were standing at the gate with the patient readiness of men who are accustomed to being put to work. "We will help with that." Calder looked at the 3 men, young 20s, 30s, strong, and they were looking at the barn with the practical assessment of people who had built things and were prepared to build more. You didn't come just to rebuild a barn, Calder said. No, Dawa agreed, but I came partly for that. He looked at Calder steadily. I came because my daughter is here. I came because there is unfinished business with Marsh and his horses. And I came because, he paused, I owed a debt that I have carried for many years, and it has begun to feel heavier than it should. You don't owe me anything, Calder said. What you did in that ravine was what was right, Dawa said simply, as is what you have done here. We are not keeping accounts. I am simply completing a circle. He looked at Nahona. She is the completion of it. Nahona met his eyes and something passed between them, not just father and daughter, but something older, the passing of one kind of understanding to another. Come inside, Calder said. I'll make coffee. Good, Dawa said. I have heard you make it properly now. Nahona made a sound that was definitely almost a laugh. Cole Darren came the following morning. He came alone, and he came at an hour when he clearly hoped to find Calder without an audience just after dawn, before the day had properly organized itself. He tied his horse at the gate and walked up to the cabin door with the look of a man approaching something he needed to get over before he talked himself out of it. Calder opened the door before he knocked. Cole startled slightly. He was 23, 24 younger than he seemed when he was riding with Brock Talley, the way people seem older when borrowed power makes them larger. Without that, he was just a young man in a dusty coat holding his hat in both hands. Van, he said. Darren. A pause. I know why you're here, Calder said. Come in. Cole came in. He looked at Nahona seated at the table and something moved across his face. Not shame exactly, but the cousin of it. The recognition of a thing done and not done at the same time. Ma'am, he said quietly. She looked at him for a long moment. You stopped, she said. He blinked. Ma'am. At the fence, when Brock told you to get the rope. She looked at him steadily. You stopped. He looked at the floor. Not soon enough. No, she agreed, but you stopped. She paused. That counts for something. He swallowed. Then he reached into his coat and produced a folded packet of papers thicker than Marsh's note, several pages, the pages of various sizes and ages. He held them out to Calder. Calder took them, opened them, read, bills of sale. 7 of them horses bearing brands that, if you knew what to look for, were modified from their original marks. Purchase records from Marsh Trading Company dated over a span of 8 months, showing transactions with ranches and settlements across a wide area. At the bottom of the stack, a ledger page numbers and names in Marsh's thin, precise hand. I've been keeping them, Cole said, since the spring. When I started to, he stopped. Started again. When I started to understand what the operation was really about. He looked at Calder. Brock doesn't know I have them. He doesn't know I kept anything. Why did you? Calder asked. Cole was quiet for a moment. Because I knew someday I'd need to make a different choice. And I thought, he stopped again, I thought having something useful might make the choice easier. Or make up for some of the ones I'd already made. It doesn't make up, Calder said, but it moves things forward. Cole nodded. He looked at the papers in Calder's hands. There's enough there, he said. For the horses, at least. And for some of the land arrangements. The coercion is harder to prove, but, he paused, if the sheriff is interested in doing something, those are a start. Keen, Calder said. He's a decent man who made bad choices, Cole said. I've known him a long time. He paused. He didn't send me here, but he said that if anyone happened to have documentation of certain activities, he would be very interested in seeing it officially. Calder looked at the papers again, then at Cole. What do you want for this? He asked. Not suspicious, just asking. Cole thought about it. To not be the same kind of man as Brock Talley, he said finally. That's all. Nahona was quiet for a moment. Then she said, that is not nothing. Cole looked at her. Something in his face shifted, not forgiveness, exactly what she hadn't offered and he hadn't asked for, but the acknowledgement that she had heard him, that she had counted what he'd done as something. He left 20 minutes later. Lighter, Calder thought. The way people leave when they have set something down. Keen came to Calder this time, not the other way. 3 days after Cole's visit, 3 days during which Calder and Dawa's men had worked on the barn wall with the coordinated efficiency of people who understood that building things together was a form of conversation, the sheriff rode in with 2 deputies and the look of a man who had made a decision and was now in the business of living it out. He sat at Calder's table. He read Cole's papers with the concentration of a man reading his own future. He read the note from Marsh. He lined them up side by side and looked at them for a long time. Cole came forward, he said. Cole came forward, Calder confirmed. He'll testify. He'll testify. Keene folded the papers carefully and placed them in his coat. His deputies sat near the door. Dawa sat at the far side of the cabin drinking coffee with the unhurried patience of a man who had lived long enough to know that this kind of moment needed to breathe. Marsh has 2 council members, Keene said. Banning and Pruitt, both of them have received favors from him over the years. They'll resist. Let them resist, Calder said. It'll be territory business eventually. This goes beyond what a town sheriff can handle properly. He looked at Calder. I'll need to write to the territorial marshal's office. That takes time. Write the letter today, Calder said. Keene nodded. In the meantime, Brock Talley and the 2 Marshmen who lit the fire. I can hold them on the barn burning if Cole testifies he saw it. Cole will testify. Keene put both hands flat on the table. I'm going to do this right, he said. I want you to know that. Not fast. Right. Right is fine, Calder said. There may be complications. Marsh has money and connections, and he'll use both. This won't be quick. I know, Keene looked at Nahona. The horses, your people's horses, I can put a hold on them legally while the investigation proceeds. They won't be able to move them. Nahona met his eyes, held the gaze for a moment, assessing, measuring, finding something there she had not expected to find. Thank you, she said, quietly, without warmth yet, but without hostility either. An acknowledgement that he was choosing correctly and that she had noticed. Keene nodded. Then he stood, collected himself, put on his hat. I've been wearing the wrong face for too long, he said, apparently to no one in particular. Turns out your own face is heavier, but fits better. He left with his deputies. The letter to the territorial marshal would be written before sundown. Brock Talley would be in a cell before the week was out, along with the 2 hired men. Eli Marsh would learn of the investigation in a manner he hadn't planned for and couldn't outrun. The process would be slow and imperfect, and it would drag across months, but it would move the way water moves through stone, not fast, but finally. The horses came home on a Thursday. 6 of them, the original 6 that had been taken, identified from Nahona's precise description of each animal's markings, and confirmed by Dawa, who knew every horse his community had ever owned with the thoroughness of a man whose people had measured their wealth and freedom in animals for generations. The territorial marshal's deputy had escorted them from Marsh's holding corrals. Cole Darren had provided the identifying information. Keene had signed the release order. The whole process had taken 11 days from the sheriff's letter to the horses, walking back through the draw. Dawa stood at the corral fence and watched them come in. Calder stood a few feet behind him. Neither of them spoke. The horses moved with the wariness of animals that have been frightened and have not entirely recovered. But when Nahona entered the corral, they gathered toward her in the specific way of animals who remember someone they trust. She moved among them, slowly touching each one cheek, shoulder, flank, speaking to them in a low, continuous murmur that was neither words exactly nor song, but something between the sound of one living creature reassuring another that they are where they are supposed to be. Calder watched her. He watched her, and he thought about the morning he had walked east to the fence with his hammer for a hinge he'd been meaning to fix, and had heard instead a sound that changed everything. He thought about the small, folded paper he had kept, and the choice he had made wrong to hold it, and the conversation that had resulted, and the one that had followed that, each one peeling back a layer of careful distance until there was not enough distance left to be anything other than honest. He thought about what he had said at the table, "You matter," and how the simplicity of it had surprised even him, the way the right words sometimes come out of you as though they'd always been there waiting for the correct moment. Dawa spoke without turning. She was 3 years old when we got the bay mare. Her mother's horse had foaled, and Nahona decided the foal was hers before anyone else had a say in the matter. A pause. She was always like that. She chooses, and then she is decided. Calder said nothing. She chose to trust you, Dawa said. That was not easy for her. She does not choose easily. He paused. But when she chooses, she is not changed by anyone else's opinion of her choice. I know, Calder said. Dawa turned to look at him. The morning light was full on his face, the deep lines, the white hair, the eyes that had seen a great deal and had not been ruined by any of it. "What are you going to do?" Dawa asked. Calder looked at Nahona in the corral, at the horses settling around her, at the mesa behind all of it, the red and ochre and gold, the sky above it so blue it looked invented. "Ask her what she wants," he said, and then he paused. "Tell her what I want, and see what we make of the distance between them." Dawa was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly with the gravity of a man for whom nodding is not a small gesture. "Good," he said. "That is the right way." She found him at the fence that evening. The east fence line, the rebuilt section, the new boards smooth and pale against the weathered older wood. He was doing what he often did in the evenings, checking the wire, the posts, the things that needed to hold. She came up beside him. They stood in the diminishing light, looking out at the mesa. "Dawa is leaving tomorrow," she said. "I know. The horses are ready to travel. His men are ready." A pause. "He wants me to come with them." Calder continued looking at the fence. "I know that too," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "He won't tell me to stay. He doesn't do that. He shows me the path and lets me walk it." A pause. "But he would like me to come." "And what would you like?" Calder asked. She looked at him. He turned to meet her eyes. "I don't know how to want two things at once," she said. "My people need me. The horses need to go home. There is still work in the investigation testimony I may need to give." And she stopped. And he said, "And I have never stayed anywhere because someone wanted me to. I have only ever stayed because I needed to." And she held his gaze. This is the first time those two things might not be different. He looked at her for a long moment. The sun was behind the ridge now, the light going amber and soft, and it lay across her face in a way that was completely unfair for a conversation this important. "I want you to stay," he said. "I'm not going to dress it up in anything practical. I want you to stay because this place feels different when you're in it, because you are the person I want to be having the next conversation with, and the one after that, and all the ones that require sitting across a table and being honest about difficult things." He paused. "That's what I want," she breathed. "And if I go," she asked, "then I hope you come back," he said. "When the horses are home and the testimony is given, and Dawa stops needing you for the immediate things." Another pause. "I'll still be here, fixing things." She was quiet for a long time. The wind moved across the mesa, evening wind cooler than the days, carrying the smell of sage and the faint mineral scent of the ridgestone. It moved her braid across her shoulder. "When I was at that post," she said eventually, "I decided something. I decided that the world was exactly what it appeared to be, that there was no mercy in it, that the intelligent position was to stop looking for it." She looked at the new fence board, the smooth pale wood, the careful joints. "You rebuilt this?" "Yes." "You didn't have to. You could have left it the way it was." "No," he said, "I couldn't have." She looked at him. "Why not?" He thought about it. "Because it shouldn't look like what they tried to make it mean." He said the same words he had used the morning she'd touched the new wood for the first time. Same reason. She reached out and placed her hand on the new board. Her fingers traced the grain of it. "I will go with Dawa," she said. "The horses need to go home." His face held steady. And then she said, "I will come back." He looked at her. Something in his chest released, not dramatically, just the easing of something that had been braced. "How long?" he asked. "As long as it takes to do the right thing," she said. "Maybe 3 weeks, maybe 4. A pause. "Will that be enough time for you to make peace with not being certain?" Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. "I've been at peace with uncertainty for a long time," he said. "I can manage a few more weeks." She looked at him. Then she looked at the fence, the new boards, the careful joints, the whole repaired line of it running clean and straight along the eastern boundary of Van Homestead, the place where she had been found, the place that had been remade. She said, "When I come back, I would like to learn more about this forge of yours." "It's complicated work," he said. "Good," she replied. "I don't trust simple things." He looked at her. She looked at him. The last of the evening lights settled around them like something decided. "Nahona," he said. She waited. "I'm glad you didn't finish deciding it," he said. That morning, about whether to fight or let it happen. Before I got there, she was quiet for a moment. I was going to fight, she said. That was how I was going to decide. But then there was no need. A pause. You were faster. Not faster, he said. I just started sooner. She considered this. That is how you do things. It seems to work, he said. She put her hand on his arm, the left one, the scarred wrist, the place she had first touched him in that moment after Brock Talley had come with his men. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. He covered her hand with his the same way as before, careful, unhurried. They stood at the rebuilt fence in the last of the light, and neither of them looked at the horizon for danger. Dawa and his men loaded out at dawn. It was a practical departure. Horses, sorted gear secured the systematic work of people who know how to travel and do it without ceremony. The 6 recovered horses were roped in a manageable string, the bay mare among them returning home with Nahona, who would bring her back when she came. Nahona packed what she had arrived with, and not much more. Calder had the coffee ready when she came inside for the last time before departure. He set a cup in front of her. She sat and drank it. The herbs on the workbench, she said. Use them for the wrist. I'll bring more when I come back. All right. The mare's leg will need checking at the 8-week mark. I'll know which week it is. She looked at him. He looked at her. The cabin was full of morning light and the smell of coffee and something that didn't have a name, but that both of them had stopped pretending wasn't there. There's a thing I want to say, she said. Say it. And when I said, do whatever you want, cowboy, she looked at her cup. I meant it the way a person means things when they have completely given up on the idea that their meaning matters. I said it because I thought it was the only language left. She paused. You taught me that there is other language, that it is worth using. He looked at her steadily. You taught me something too, he said. What? That fixing things, he said, is only part of the work. The other part is knowing what was worth building in the first place. She looked at him. Then she stood, and before he could do anything or say anything, she crossed the few feet between them and held on to him briefly, firmly, the embrace of someone who is being exact about what they feel rather than performing it. He put his arms around her carefully. It lasted only a moment. Then she stepped back and picked up her cup and finished the coffee and put the cup in the wash basin and walked to the door. 3 weeks, she said. Perhaps 4. I'll be here, he said. She stepped out into the morning. He stood in the doorway. Dawa, already mounted, looked at Calder from across the yard. He raised one hand, not a wave exactly, more the gesture of a man completing a thought that has taken many years to finish. Calder raised his hand in return. Then they were moving the string of horses, the rider's Nahona on the mare, her braid dark against the morning light. They took the eastern trail, the same trail Dawa had arrived by, and they moved with the particular unhurried pace of people who know where they are going and are certain of their return. Calder watched them until they were past the ridge. Then he went back and poured the rest of the pamphlet and sat at the table. The cabin was quiet. It had been quiet before she arrived. This was a different quiet, not empty but expectant. The way the air before rain is different from ordinary air, charged with what is coming even when what is coming hasn't arrived yet. He sat with his coffee in the morning light. On the workbench, the small clay bowl of herbs she left each day was there full. She had filled it this morning before loading out. Something for the wrist. The smell of pine resin, and something that didn't have a name in any language he knew. He reached over and touched the edge of the bowl. Then he stood and picked up his hammer and went to the forge. She came back in 22 days. Not 21, not 25. 22 at mid-morning, the bay mare carrying her through the eastern trail at a pace that was not slow. Calder heard the horse and came out of the barn. He was working on the rebuilt section, adding a new hinge mechanism to the door. Something he'd been making at the forge in the evenings when the day's other work was done. He stood in the barn doorway and watched her come. She tied the mare at the corral. She walked across the yard. She was wearing different clothes, fresher voice, the riding coat he hadn't seen before, her braid wound with a length of red cord that she hadn't had before. When she reached him, she stopped. The horses are home, she said. Good. The testimony was given. Keene was there. The territorial marshal's deputy took the statement. A pause. Cole Darren testified also. Banning and Pruitt from the council have been referred for their own inquiry. Another pause. It will take time, but it is moving. Yes, he said. Marsh's assets have been frozen pending the investigation. including the land he had attempted to claim adjacent to yours. She looked at him steadily. You will not hear from him again. I expect not. A pause. Dawa sends his regards, she said. He says the river found its way, as it does. Calder let out a breath. Smart man. Insufferably so, she said, and she smiled the full weight of it, the same smile she had given him the night of the fire, the smile that reached her eyes and stayed there and made it difficult to look at anything else. He looked at the forge visible through the barn opening. I've been working on something, he said, in the evenings. She looked. On the workbench among the other pieces and parts of the hinge project, there was something else, a small iron frame carefully made, the kind of thing that could hold a clay bowl. A stand for the herbs she left on the workbench each morning. She looked at it for a wing moment, then she looked at him. You fix things, she said. I tricked him, he said. She walked past him into the barn and picked up the iron frame and turned it in her hands, examining the joints, the finish, the deliberate care of it. She set it back on the workbench. The bowl will fit, she said. I measured. She looked at him. The barn was full of morning light and the smell of fresh cut wood and iron, and the particular quality of a day that has decided to be significant. I came back, she said. You said you would, he said. I did. She met his eyes. And I intend to keep saying it. He looked at her, she looked at him. Outside the bay mare moved in the corral and the wind brushed the mesa in its patient way, and the sandstone ridge stood in the morning sun, the color of everything that had ever been real. There's coffee, he said. Good, she said. Make it the way I showed you. Less bitter. More water. Right. They walked together out of the barn and across the yard toward the cabin. The new fence boards gleamed pale along the eastern boundary. The forge had gone cold overnight, but would be lit again within the hour. The barn wall was rebuilt solid, the new wood fitting cleanly into the old. Van Homestead sat at the foot of the southern ridge in the full morning light, a place built from endurance and stubborn refusal, carrying its repairs openly, not hiding them. The same, and completely different, the east fence one last time. Later that morning, after the coffee and the conversation that covered 22 days in careful detail, they walked to the east fence together. It was a habit now, or the beginning of one, the way certain places become necessary not for what they are, but for what they witnessed. The fence line ran straight and repaired the new boards pale gold in the morning sun, the old boards dark and weathered beside them. The post that had held her still stood smooth and unscarred, the new wood Calder had set the morning after he'd found her. She stood in front of it the way she had before, not touching it, looking at it. I have a question for you, she said. Ask it. She looked at him. If the paper from Marsh had not fallen from my fingers that morning, if you had found me and carried me inside, and there had been no note, would you have still done all of it? Stood in front of Brock Tally, refused Keene, kept me safe while I healed. He held her gaze. I heard the mare before I saw you, he said. Something was wrong and I went toward it. That's what I do. A pause. The note didn't change what you needed. It only told me who I'd be dealing with when I helped you with it. She looked at him. So yes, he said, I would have done all of it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at the post, the smooth new wood, the careful joints, the place where something terrible had happened and been rebuilt into something that didn't look like the terrible thing anymore. I know, she said. I just wanted to hear you say it. He raised an eyebrow. You already knew. I needed the words, she said simply. Knowing a thing and hearing it said that are not the same things from. He considered this. No, he agreed. They're not. She reached out and placed her hand on the new post, flat-palmed, feeling the grain of it. Then she reached her other hand out toward them. He took it. They stood at the east fence with the sun rising over the mesa and the wind beginning its first conversations with the rocks and the whole vast, unforgiving, beautiful country around them, a country that would never be gentle, that had never pretended to be, that offered only what it was and nothing more. And what it was on this morning was enough, more than enough, enough that neither of them looked at the horizon for danger, only forward, only toward whatever came next, which they would figure out one day at a time. The river doesn't know where it is going, it just goes.